So yeah, I mean this goes back quite a way. As far as I know, in terms of robots, this is probably the first. There is, I think I've put a link at the bottom of the presentation, which we'll send out. The obviously people were interested in mazes and animals before this, even some stuff in the 19th century. But in terms of maze solving robots, I think this is probably the first. And he worked with there was a few other people doing robot research at the time, and he had some students working with him. He was mentor for people, and there's suddenly this explosion of maze solving robots happened just after, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. A lot of them look like Theseus, which you'll see in a minute. And obviously, part of the thing was that images appeared in lots of magazines, appeared on TV, and probably is a direct inspiration for Micromouse, I guess. So it is that Claude Shannon, right? Father of information theory. Some of you, if you've done things like electronic engineering, be aware of Shannon's law. It's not the only thing he did. There's a bunch of stuff, as well as a character as well. I mean, apart from the fact that he effectively put a load of stuff that even in the 90s and into this century, people are still debating. He's also a really interesting character, as is a case when you find people in history. He's got, I mean, he rolled through Bell Labs on a unicycle juggling at one point. He built one of the useless boxes. He wasn't the first to do it, but he built one. He built a machine to solve Rubik's Cube. He built talking chess solving machines. He built a Roman numeral computer. I don't know why, probably because he could. Great tinkerer, motorized pogo stick, rocket powered frisbee. So anyway, I just because you could do an entire conference, I'm sure, on Shannon. The note at the bottom of this is to do with the fact he did work at Bell Labs with telephone relays, and you'll see why that's relevant in a minute. So the first, as far as I can tell, and he presented a paper at the 8th conference cybernetics in '51, and it's likely that some of these early prototypes were built in 1950. And the key elements, I'll show you the insides in a minute. So solving by trial and error, a 5x5 maze, which is a size that's quite popular for people's houses. It had a sensing finger and 75 relays, so there's no valves in this design. Obviously, people like Bell Labs or AT&T would a lot of their switching gear would have been built of relays with logic inside. I think, I mean, he did. Just talking about Shannon himself, his paper at MIT was to do with the application of Boolean logic and the ability, for instance, he posited about switching, because a lot of the switching on telephone circuits was done manually at the time, as you all probably know. I think the guy at the VP of technology at AT&T actually said it wasn't true, which obviously it was. Right, so this is the 1950, 1951 design. There aren't a lot of pictures of this. There's a set of Theseus, which is the second set of mice, based on roughly the same principles, which is the one you see in all the videos and all the pictures. As far as I can tell, this was it had an XY design, so these lead screws, pretty classic design. It had plugs where you plug in the goal, and it had, as you can see on the left-hand side, a sensing figure, a piece of wire, and a lamp, right? And it would run through, and I'll talk about what the maze walls were on this particular design in a minute. And it had some stuff at the bottom, because obviously these are on lead screws. You can't move it manually if you want to show the sort of mouse, as it were, running from a particular place. So you could set it in manual mode, you see the switches down the bottom. you could manually control the motors, switch it back into automatic mode, and solve the maze. Not many pictures on this slide. I apologise. So basically, as it reaches the centre, it decides which way to go. It hits a partition. I'll talk about how it does it on this 1951 one and the 1952 one. Hits a partition in reverse, go back to the centre, new directions chosen. When it reaches a goal, when it detects the goal, when the wire hits the goal terminal, it stops, lights a lamp, and rings a bell. If you move it back to a starting point, it remembers the solution and goes to that solution straight away, right? And it'll always remember that solution. If you move it to an unexplored position in the maze, it'll go into explore mode until it reaches known territory and goes to a known region. It's also got I was going to say code, but it's not code. It's got a counter built in that if you move the maze walls, it can end up in a situation where it effectively circles, not knowing how to get out. There's actually a 24-step counter that will force it back into explore mode so it can solve the maze again. And the solution isn't a trivial one. So we've got, obviously, in Micromouse, we do wall follower competitions. This has got enough intelligence to solve any 5x5 maze. There's a few sheets that are still around. I quite like this. The first one talks about the barriers. So on this first prototype, if you like, a 1951, 1951, they used effectively bent paper clips where the wire sensor touches along the edges of each square, and you just slip it over the corner posts. The other bottom right here talks about the memory array, which I think is quite interesting as well. So just before I go on to how it's stored, it's effectively logical. You notice there is scribbled out. This was from some notes I think he sent to a colleague. Scribbled out the number 25 relays and put 50. Obviously, with a 5x5 maze, you've got 25 cells, and you need 2 bits to store which direction you've exited from that cell of the maze. So obviously, it's 50 relays. It makes me happy that I'm not the only one that makes mistakes. I'm sure his whole histories of amazing things with Claude Shannon. So this, I've got. This is one of the sheets that's quite interesting. I'm not going to go through all of it. You notice there's some handwritten notes on it. He goes through exploration, the goal strategy, avoiding circles, and general notes. If I show the top of that, it looks like pseudocode, right? It's a basic description, a human level description, English description of how each bit of the computing program works. Remember, this is all relays, so 75 relays, 25 views for the maze. It looks like there aren't actually a lot of. I couldn't find any wiring diagrams, but from these notes alone, there's enough to figure out. For instance, you need some sort of state machine based on relays. There's some sort of set of relays doing some sort of sequential count. So you know whether you're reading the direction, whether you're making the note, whether you're rotating, whether you're starting the motor, which way you're going. So all of this is sort of, it's just interesting to read, and it's written. I think obviously, a lot of us on the call have been writing computer programs, but I think anybody could probably read this and go, I get an idea of how it's written. Even the paper that was presented in the Cybernetics conference was readable, right? And there were articles in Life magazine, a whole bunch of different, obviously engineering, electronics, electrical magazines, but even things like Life magazine, there was descriptions of basically how it worked. So I think this is really, really good. I won't go through all the details. So then the 1952 Theseus Mouse. So this is the one where you see all the pictures of, right? This has got a physical mouse that moves around the maze. I've got a video, although playing a video. I've given the links of the video online because it's not a downloadable thing. If I've got enough time, I'll play it, but otherwise you can watch the link. It's Shannon himself talking about the way the mouse moves around, what it can do. Right at the end, there's quite a nice bit where he shows his sort of sense of humour. It sounds like quite a joker. It wasn't too bad in terms of speed. So it took about 2 minutes to learn the maze, about 10 to 15 seconds to reach the cheese to get to the solution once he solved it. His wife Betty, his second wife Betty, obviously not with a lot of these people who get help. Bell Labs, they had prototyping rooms, people who build this stuff. This stuff was tended to be. He actually built it at home, right, with his wife Betty, who was a mathematician at Bell Labs. So it's sort of interesting that he built a lot of his gadgets at home. There were several copies of this thing made, as far as I can tell. And there's a couple more photographs later on in the presentation. This just to show you, so they built. I think this was done for Life magazines. These photos. So this shows you they built a mouse, which was basically had, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It basically had a magnet in. They put a light on the top of it, and then took long exposure photographs. And you can see the start, which is sort of top left. You can see the mouse or the mechanism exploring the maze, getting down to the target cell. In a way, I mean, I've got a bunch of information about how it worked in theory and how electrically it works, but it's sort of something I'd actually like to look at, have seen real life and play with. All these walls were removable. You can see that in the video where he changes some of these walls. And then once it's and the thing on the left is this thing they must have built for Life magazine. The original mouse actually was carved out of wood. This one had a cell and a bulb, and also had the contacts and the magnet inside. This sort of shows once it's solved it, which is image 1, you put it back to the start, it goes straight to the goal. You put it in a different location along the path, and it'll get straight to the solution. Number 4 is where it hadn't, where it put it on an unexplored square, and you can see obviously it rotated several times before it found the way out. And then as soon as it gets back to a known path, it goes straight to the goal. This is one of the mice that he ran round. Hollowed wood carved to it. They had a 2-inch magnet in the middle. Brass wheels for legs, a pipe cleaner for tail, 2 copper whiskers, and then the cheese was a brass terminal that rings a bell when touched by the whiskers. So the color photo, I guess a lot of the images on that I've got on the web for magazines that are printed in black and white. There's a color picture of the insides. So you can see on the far right, that's the head that rotates. There's obviously a magnet on there that rotates the mouse on the mouse surface, and you can see the left and the left, right, and the up, down.
Say I take this partition and move it over here, and suppose I move this one over here. There are over a million different ways you can set up mazes on this board. Now we'll take the mouse and put him back in the same starting point, and let's see what he does. He's replacing the old obsolete information with what he's now learning about this new situation. Those copper whiskers of his tell him when he's up against the wall, has to try a different direction. Now he's through the change section, and his memory is correct for the rest of the way to the goal.